May 15, 1944. Camp Algona, Iowa. Feldwebel Hans Richter steps off the train into air so thick with humidity he can barely breathe. He's been traveling for 6 weeks, from the sand-blasted ruins of Tunisia, where Rommel's Afrika Korps finally surrendered, to Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia, then Norfolk to here, to the middle of nowhere America, to a place that exists only as endless flatness on a map. The camp sprawls across prairie land that stretches beyond sight in every direction. No mountains to break the horizon, no forest to hide in, just endless corn, green and golden, swaying in waves that make him seasick just looking at them. An American officer with a Midwest drawl that makes every word sound like it's being pulled through honey reads names from a clipboard. His voice carries across the processing yard where 300 Afrika Korps veterans stand in the blazing sun, their tropical uniforms completely inadequate for Iowa's summer heat. "You'll be working for local farmers," the officer announces in heavily accented German. "Agricultural labor. You'll be paid 80 cents a day in camp scrip." He pauses, scanning his list with a pencil, making check marks next to names. "Richter, you're going to the Zimmerman farm." Richter freezes. His throat constricts. His heart begins pounding in a way it didn't even when British tanks were bearing down on his position in North Africa. Zimmerman. The officer continues, oblivious to the impact of what he's just said. "Schultz, you're with the Hoffmans." Weber. "The Schmidts need help with corn harvest." Braun. "You're headed to the Becker place." Fischer. "You're assigned to the Müller farm." Wagner. "You're with the Schneiders." The Germans exchange glances, their eyes wide with recognition, and something that might be fear, or might be wonder, or might be both. These aren't American names, not really. These are their names. The names from their villages, from the monuments in their town squares, from their military rosters, from their graveyards. Names their mothers called out at dinner time. Names carved into war memorials from the last war. Names that define what it means to be German. Unteroffizier Paul Schultz whispers to Richter, his voice barely audible over the hot wind blowing across the prairie. "Did he just say I'm working for someone named Hoffman? My mother was a Hoffman before she married. My uncle is a Hoffman. Half my village has Hoffmans in it." Richter can't respond. His mind is racing, trying to process information that doesn't fit into any framework he's been given. They'd done the arithmetic on the Atlantic crossing, 6 weeks in the bowels of Liberty ships, calculating numbers to pass the time when you're packed into a hold with 500 other men, and there's nothing to do but think and count and try not to go insane. 6 million Germans had immigrated to America between 1820 and 1920. 6 million. Let that number sink in. That's twice the population of Berlin in 1944. That's more than the entire population of Bavaria. That's the equivalent of picking up the entire kingdom of Saxony and transplanting it across an ocean. 1 out of every 10 Germans alive in 1820 eventually ended up in America. 1 out of 10. The Nazi propaganda machine had told them these immigrants were suffering. Enslaved by Jewish bankers, starving in urban ghettos, working in sweatshops for pennies, begging to return to the Reich, but unable to afford passage. Goebbels himself had broadcast weekly radio programs about the plight of German Americans. "Our racial brothers in America cry out for liberation," he'd declared in his speeches, his voice rising to that characteristic shriek. "They live in squalor while mongrel races prosper. They've been corrupted by democracy, weakened by race mixing, destroyed by capitalism. When we win this war, we will rescue them, bring them back to the fatherland, restore them to racial purity. But now, as the train that takes them from the camp to the farms clatters through the Iowa countryside on tracks laid by German-American engineers, past fields planted by German-American farmers, through towns built by German-American hands, they see something else entirely. Every mailbox they pass bears witness to a different Truth, Schneider, Becker, Wagner, Kaufmann, Klein, Gross, Zimmermann, Hoffmann, Müller, Schmidt, each name a small betrayal of everything they'd been told. Each name a crack in the ideology that had sent them to war. Each name a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. May 16, 1944. Hancock County, Iowa. 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun is already blazing, turning the morning mist to steam. Hans Richter stands at the edge of the Zimmerman property, and he can't see where it ends. The corn rows vanish into morning mist that glows gold in the early light. A red barn, larger than any building in his entire village back in Saxony, rises from the landscape like a cathedral, its roof gleaming with fresh paint. A windmill spins slowly, pumping water with a rhythmic creak. Grain silos tower like medieval keeps. A red barn larger than any building in his village rises from the landscape like a cathedral. Otto Zimmermann walks out of a house with electric lights blazing in every window. Even at dawn, even in peacetime. Such casual waste of power that it makes Richter's chest tight with something that might be anger or might be envy. Back home, you use one bulb, and you turn it off when you leave the room. And you don't waste electricity, because electricity is precious and rationed, and you can't just throw it around like it's nothing. Zimmermann is tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man who's done physical work his entire life, but who's also eaten well his entire life. He's wearing denim overalls that look new, that would cost a month's wages in Germany, if you could even find denim in Germany anymore. His boots are leather, good leather, not the cardboard and wood pulp substitutes that German soldiers have been wearing since 1942. He's smoking a cigarette, American tobacco, and the smell makes Richter's mouth water. Zimmermann is sixth-generation American, though Richter doesn't know this yet. His great-great-great-great-grandfather left Bavaria in 1843, the same year Richter's family almost starved in the same region. The same year the potato blight hit, and people were eating grass and bark and anything they could find. The Zimmermann family left. The Richter family stayed. That single decision, made by men dead for a century, has led to this moment. Zimmermann speaks English with a Midwest drawl that turns all his vowels soft and round. "You must be Richter," he says, extending his hand for a handshake. Not a Nazi salute, just a plain American handshake. "Heard you boys were coming. Figured I'd put you to work. We got corn that needs tending." Then, almost as an afterthought, like he's just remembered something, he adds a phrase in German. "Verstehst du Deutsch? Do you understand German?" The words are accented, Americanized, syllables softened by generations of English, consonants rounded off, grammar simplified, but they're German, unmistakably German. The language of Goethe and Schiller coming out of this American farmer's mouth. Richter nods, unable to speak, his throat closed up. Zimmermann switches to German entirely, rusty but functional, the grammar of a man who learned it from his grandmother and hasn't used it much since. "My grandmother insisted we learn," he says in German. "She was born in Germany, came over when she was 5. Said we should know where we came from, even if we're never going back. She made all of us learn. Said a man should know his roots. But we're Americans now, have been for 6 generations. The tour that follows systematically destroys Richter's understanding of the world, piece by piece, room by room, acre by acre. Otto Zimmermann owns 640 acres. 640 acres. In Germany, anyone with 100 acres is considered aristocracy, is called Herr, has workers and servants and status. The Junkers who run Prussia, the landed nobility who've controlled German politics for centuries, average 500 acres. Zimmermann, descendant of Bavarian peasants, people who fled Germany with nothing, exceeds them all. He owns 2 John Deere tractors, brand new, green and yellow, sitting in the barn like mechanical gods. Richter has seen exactly 3 tractors in his entire life before this moment. All of them belong to the Wehrmacht, painted field gray, used for military purposes. Here's a civilian with 2 tractors just for farming. 2. He owns a combine harvester that cost, Zimmerman mentions casually, about $2,400. Richter does the math in his head, converting to Reichsmarks at the official exchange rate, and comes up with a number that exceeds what most German families will see in their entire lives combined. That's more money than his father earned in 20 years of factory work. For one machine that harvests grain. He owns a 1942 Ford truck. Despite the war, despite rationing, despite the fact that Germany hasn't been able to produce civilian vehicles since 1940. A civilian with a private truck. Not military, not government, private, his own truck. He has electricity throughout his house. Not just one bulb per room that you turn off when you're not using it, but multiple fixtures in every room. Lights that burn all day because why not? Electricity is cheap and abundant. Electric outlets everywhere, in every room, sometimes 2 or 3 per room. An electric refrigerator humming in the kitchen, keeping food cold with the flip of a switch. An electric range for cooking, not wood, not coal, just turn a dial and heat appears. A Zenith radio in polished walnut sitting in the living room, bigger than anything Richter has ever seen, with a dial that receives dozens of stations. A telephone mounted on the wall in the kitchen, a private telephone line, you can just pick it up and call people. Indoor plumbing with hot water. This is the detail that finally breaks Richter. You turn a handle, and hot water flows out of a tap. Not cold water that you heat on a stove. Not water you have to haul from a well or a pump. Hot water, instantly, as much as you want. No heating required. No hauling from wells. Just turn the handle and there it is. In Germany, Richter's family heats water in a kettle on a coal stove. And you use it sparingly because coal is rationed and water is heavy to carry. The breakfast that Mrs. Zimmerman serves could feed Richter's family for 3 days, maybe 4 if they stretched it. Eggs, 6 of them, just for him, fried in butter until the edges are crispy. Bacon strips piled like timber on a plate, more meat than he's seen in months. Toast from store-bought white bread, the kind that's soft and spongy, and nothing like the dense black bread he grew up eating, slathered with butter. Real butter, not margarine, not turnip spread, not the synthetic garbage they've been eating in Germany since 1942, but actual butter churned from cow's milk, orange juice in a tall glass, cold from the refrigerator, sweet and acidic and incredible. He didn't know you could drink oranges. He's never even seen an orange except in pictures. Coffee with cream and sugar. Both cream and sugar. As if rationing never existed. As if there isn't a war on. As if you can just have cream and sugar whenever you want it. My boys are fighting in Italy, Zimmerman says, pouring more coffee from an endless pot. 3 sons. 2 with Patton's army, 1 with Mark Clark. Maybe against your friends. He says it without hatred, without anger, without any particular emotion at all. Just stating a fact, like he's commenting on the weather. His sons are killing Germans while he feeds Germans. Strange world, isn't it? He says this while buttering another piece of toast, while the sun rises over fields that stretch to the horizon, while his wife hums something in the kitchen. Your family, Richter finally manages to ask, speaking for the first time since breakfast began. Why did they leave Germany? Zimmerman sits back, sips his coffee, considers the question like he's thought about it before. Bad harvests, he says finally. No future there. My great-great-great-grandfather, that's 5 greats. He walked from Munich to Hamburg. Took him 3 weeks. Sold everything his family owned for ship passage. Arrived in Baltimore with $17. $17. That's all he had. And now, Zimmerman gestures out the window at the endless fields, at the barn, and the silos, and the tractors, and the trucks. Now, I gross about $12,000 a year. Good year, maybe 15. Richter cannot process the number. His brain refuses to accept it. A German factory worker, a skilled factory worker, makes 2,000 Reichsmarks annually if he's lucky, if there's work, if the factory hasn't been bombed, If the war hasn't disrupted everything, $12,000 is, he does the math, about 60,000 Reichsmarks. 60,000. That's 30 years of wages for a German worker. In 1 year. From farming. The pantry tour comes next, and this is where Richter's worldview completely collapses. Mrs. Zimmerman, born Catherine Müller, third-generation American, speaks English with no accent, but German with her husband, when they don't want the prisoner to understand something. Opens door after door of a walk-in pantry that's bigger than Richter's bedroom back home. Shelves stacked to the ceiling, floor to ceiling, hundreds of jars of home canning. Tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, pears, apple butter, strawberry jam, pickles, relish, all of it preserved in mason jars with handwritten labels. Store-bought goods on other shelves. Coffee, not ersatz coffee. Real coffee, cans of it. Sugar in 50-pound sacks. Flour in 50-pound sacks. Cases of Coca-Cola stacked in the corner. Canned milk. Canned meat. Boxes of crackers. Jars of peanut butter. Honey in glass jars. Maple syrup from Vermont. Rice. Beans. Pasta. Oatmeal. Cornmeal. Everything. Everything you could possibly need. We could eat for a year without leaving the farm, Catherine says simply, stating it as an obvious fact. Not bragging, just explaining. We put up about 500 jars every summer. Can't let food go to waste. In Hamburg, Richter knows his mother queues for 4 hours for a loaf of black bread if she's lucky. If the bakery hasn't been bombed, if the shipment arrived, if her ration card hasn't expired. 4 hours for one loaf of bread that has sawdust mixed in to stretch the flour. 4 hours standing in line while American bombers might come overhead at any moment. His sister hasn't seen an egg in 6 months. His father hasn't had real coffee since 1941. His family hasn't had meat except for their Sunday ration, and that's usually horse meat or organ meat, the parts nobody wanted before the war. And here in Iowa, in the middle of America, a farmer has a pantry that could feed 100 people, has more food stored in one room than Richter's entire village has seen in a year. The numbers across America are staggering, numbers that prisoners of war are beginning to learn, beginning to calculate, beginning to understand. By 1940, Wisconsin is 40% German-American. 40%, nearly half the state. Milwaukee is nearly 70% German-American. The city has German newspapers published daily, German theaters performing German plays, German beer gardens serving German beer. Well, they did until the First World War made it unpatriotic, made speaking German in public suspicious, made being openly German dangerous. Now they're just American newspapers that happen to have editors named Schmidt. American theaters that happen to stage shows directed by people named Wagner. American bars that happen to serve beer brewed by Schlitz and Pabst and Blatz and Miller. Miller being anglicized from Müller. German for Miller, a name so common in Germany it's like Smith in English. Minnesota has 162 towns with German names. New Ulm, New Munich, Hamburg. Berlin, pronounced Berlin with the accent on the first syllable, not Berlin like in Germany. Cologne, Bismarck, Hanover, Stuttgart. Germans who fled the old country and then rebuilt it piece by piece. Name by name, town by town in the prairie. In Texas, there's a dialect called Texas German, spoken by 100,000 people. German that's been frozen in time since the 1840s, preserving words and phrases that no longer exist in modern Germany, mixed with Spanish and English and something uniquely Texan. Germans who arrived in the 1840s and created their own world in the hill country, raising cattle and growing cotton and building stone houses that look like they belong in Bavaria but exist under the Texas sun. At Camp Hearn, Texas, prisoner of war Klaus Fischer is assigned to work in a town called New Braunfels. Braunfels, like the castle on the Lahn River in Hesse, but new. Everything in America is new. New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New Orleans, New Braunfels. The town was founded by Prince Karl of Solms-Braunfels, who brought 7,000 Germans to Texas in 1845. Not fleeing poverty, he was aristocracy. He had money and position and status. Fleeing the future he saw coming, the wars, the nationalism, the blood he knew would soak European soil for the next century. He saw it coming, and he got out. These Germans-turned-Texans now own cattle ranches spanning thousands of acres. They own cotton gins processing millions of pounds. They own oil derricks pumping black gold out of land they bought for pennies. They own general stores serving communities. They own banks holding mortgages. They speak English with a Texas drawl, and German with their grandparents, and Spanish with their workers, and they own everything. They were supposed to be dying. Fisher writes to his mother in a letter he knows will be censored, that American officers will read before it's sent, but he writes it anyway, because he needs someone to know. They were supposed to need us. The Führer told us the Germans in America were suffering, were oppressed, were crying out for rescue. But they're richer than anyone I knew in Germany. They're richer than the factory owners. They're richer than the party officials. They drive Cadillacs. They have swimming pools. Swimming pools, Mother. For recreation. Not for bathing, not for necessity, for recreation. They have so much water they can fill giant holes in the ground and swim in them for fun. June 1944. Reading, Pennsylvania. 300 prisoners of war arrive at Reading Army Airfield to be processed and assigned to work details in the area. Reading is 90% Pennsylvania Dutch, not Dutch at all. Deutsch, German, corrupted by American tongues over centuries into Dutch. The Pennsylvania Dutch are descendants of Germans who arrived in the early 1700s, Palatines fleeing war and famine, Mennonites and Amish fleeing religious persecution, German speakers who built farms and towns, and a whole culture in the hills of eastern Pennsylvania. The prisoners are processed by Sergeant Kleinfeldt, whose grandfather left Westphalia in 1882 to escape mandatory military service, who came to America to avoid being drafted into the Kaiser's army. Now his grandson is an American sergeant processing German prisoners of war. Corporal Dietrich, whose family fled the Kulturkampf when Bismarck tried to destroy the Catholic Church in the 1870s, who came to America for religious freedom. Private Albrecht, third-generation American who speaks no German, but whose name echoes through Prussian history. One of the old noble families, now completely American, all American soldiers, all with German surnames, all fighting against Germany. Prisoner of war Wilhelm Braun cannot comprehend it. These are Volksgenossen, racial comrades in Nazi ideology. They should be allies. The blood should call to blood. The racial instinct should unite them. Instead, Sergeant Kleinfeldt's son is flying B-17s over Berlin, dropping bombs on his ancestral homeland. Corporal Dietrich's brother commands a tank destroyer in France, hunting German panzers. Private Albrecht's cousin died at Anzio, killed by German artillery fire. The Pennsylvania countryside is a mirror world, like looking through glass at a distorted reflection of Germany. The hex signs on barns, geometric folk art painted on the sides of buildings, are Germanic tradition brought from the Rhineland 3 centuries ago. The foods, scrapple and sauerkraut and pretzels, are all German. The names everywhere are German, or Germanish. Yoder from Joder, Graf from Graf, Weaver, anglicized from Weber, Snyder from Schneider. At the Yoder farm where Braun is assigned to work, dinner conversation flows seamlessly between English and Pennsylvania German, sometimes within the same sentence, sometimes within the same word. The dialect is 300 years old, frozen in time, carrying words that no longer exist in modern German, grammar that sounds archaic, pronunciation that's been warped by English. Mr. Yoder's grandfather arrived in 1820, owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a letter of introduction to a distant cousin. Now the family has 400 acres, 60 head of cattle, modern milking equipment, 2 cars sitting in the barn, and a son at Harvard. Harvard. The Yoders, who would have been serfs in Germany, who would have worked someone else's land for their entire lives, who would have died poor and passed poverty to their children, have a son at Harvard studying law. Why didn't your grandfather stay? Braun asks one evening, the question that's been burning in his mind since he arrived. Why leave? Stay for what? Yoder responds, looking up from the newspaper he's reading. To be drafted into some prince's army? To die in some war over some border dispute? To starve when the crops failed? Here we choose our own wars. Here we fight when we decide it's worth fighting for. The irony cuts deep, deeper than Braun can articulate. America is fighting a war it chose, a war the people voted for, a war Congress declared, a war the entire nation decided to fight. Germany is fighting a war one man chose, a war that was imposed from above, a war nobody voted for, a war that was decided by a dictator and his inner circle. Sunday, July 9, 1944, St. John's Lutheran Church, rural Missouri. 25 prisoners of war. Prisoners must be allowed to practice their religion. The congregation is 100% German-American. Families whose names read like a directory of German towns, Steinberg and Hoffmann, and Wagner and Schmidt and Müller and Becker. The service alternates between English and German. Sometimes the pastor speaks in English, sometimes in German, depending on his audience, depending on his point. The hymnal is bilingual, German on the left page, English on the right. The stained glass windows, beautiful things depicting biblical scenes in brilliant colors, were made in Munich in 1887, shipped across the Atlantic as gifts from the old country to the new. They sing Ein feste Burg, a mighty fortress is our God. Martin Luther's hymn in German, in America. While American bombs fall on German cities, prisoner of war Georg Metzger sits between Frau Steinberg, whose grandfather left Prussia in 1852 after the failed revolution, and Herr Hoffmann, whose son is in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese who are allied with Germany, fighting the people who are supposed to be Germany's friends. The congregation sings with fervor, with genuine emotion, with voices that crack on the high notes. These are not people who abandoned their heritage. They brought it with them, preserved it, transformed it into something new. They're German and American simultaneously, both and neither, something unique. The sermon is about forgiveness. Reverend Dietrich, whose nephew was killed in Italy last month by German artillery fire, whose family received the telegram 2 weeks ago, preaches forgiveness while his nephew's gold star flag hangs in the church window, while his sister sits in the front pew crying silently. He preaches about turning the other cheek, about loving your enemies, about the radical forgiveness that Christ demands. Metzger cannot imagine this, cannot imagine forgiving the people who killed your nephew, cannot imagine standing in a pulpit and preaching love when you want to scream hate. After the service, the congregation serves lunch in the church basement, a tradition that predates the war, that will continue after the war. That's just what they do every Sunday. Real coffee percolates in 3 large urns, the smell filling the basement, making the prisoners' mouths water. Tables groan under the weight of food that seems impossible, that seems like a hallucination. White bread and pumpernickel, butter and jam, ham and roast beef, potato salad, German-style, coleslaw, 3 kinds of pie, apple and cherry, and pecan. Frau Steinberg, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and strong hands, tells Metzger about her family while loading his plate with more food than he can possibly eat. My grandfather left because there was no future in Germany, she says, spreading butter on bread like it's nothing. Only wars and hunger and serving masters who didn't care if you lived or died. Here we found peace. My father never held a gun his entire life. My husband never held a gun. My sons, she pauses, her voice catching. My sons hold guns now, 3 of them, all in uniform. But they chose to, for America, not for a king or a Kaiser or a Führer. Metzger writes that night in his journal, a violation of camp rules, but he writes anyway, hiding the notebook under his mattress. Everything we were told was backwards. Everything. The Germans who left found paradise. We who stayed found hell. They kept what was good about being German, the work ethic, the craftsmanship, the music, the food, the language, the traditions. They discarded what was poison, the militarism, the obedience to authority, the hatred of outsiders, the belief that Germans were superior. They kept the good and threw away the bad, and they prospered. August 1944. Harvest season across the American Midwest. 30,000 German prisoners of war work on German-American farms. The irony is overwhelming, suffocating, impossible to escape. Schmitz squatting Schmitz, Müllers feeding Müllers, Wagner's supervising Wagner's. The same names on both sides of the barbed wire, the same blood in their veins, the same ancestors in their family trees. Except one side chose democracy and the other chose dictatorship. One side chose freedom and the other chose obedience. One side chose America and the other chose Hitler. Hans Bauer works for Emil Bauer, no relation, in Nebraska. Emil owns 1,000 acres of corn, fields so large you can't see from one end to the other. Corn growing in straight rows that extend to the horizon. His great-grandfather left Bavaria in 1867 with nothing but strong hands and a willingness to work. Arrived in New York during the aftermath of the Civil War. Took a train west to Nebraska when it was still a territory. Claimed land under the Homestead Act. 160 acres for free if you improved it, and built an empire from dirt. The machinery is a revelation. Each piece more incredible than the last. John Deere tractors that do the work of 50 men, that can plow a field in hours that would take weeks by hand. International Harvester combines that can harvest and thresh grain simultaneously, that can clear a field in a day. Mechanized corn pickers that strip ears faster than human hands can follow. That process more corn in an hour than a man could in a week. Automated milking systems that process hundreds of gallons daily. In Germany, Hans tells Emil while they're working side by side, we still harvest with scythes in many places. Some villages still use oxen. My village got its first tractor in 1938, and it was for military use only. We did too, Emil responds, lighting a cigarette and passing the pack to Hans without thinking about it, treating him like a worker, not a prisoner. 40 years ago, we were using hand tools. But here, progress is profitable. New machinery means more production, means more money, means better machinery. It's a cycle. In Germany, tradition is law. If your grandfather did it one way, you do it the same way. Change is suspect. Emil's 3 sons are in uniform. Photographs of them sitting on the mantel in the living room in dress uniforms. Young men with serious faces and Bauer features. 1 in Europe with the First Army, 2 in the Pacific with the Marines. They volunteered, Emil says quietly, staring at the photos like he's trying to memorize faces he already knows by heart. Day after Pearl Harbor. Didn't wait for the draft. Walked into the recruiting station together and signed up. To fight Germany? Hans asks. To fight tyranny, Emil corrects. There's a difference. My grandfather left Germany to escape men like Hitler. Men who thought they had the right to tell you how to live, what to think, who to be. Turns out Hitler followed us here anyway, across the ocean, into Europe, into our lives. So we'll finish it. We'll kill his Reich, and then we'll go back to farming. Emil shows Hans letters from his son in Europe, censored but readable. Sections blacked out, but enough remaining to get the general idea. The son is with Patton's Third Army, racing across France, killing Germans, liberating French towns, pushing toward the German border. Does it hurt? Hans asks. The question he's been wanting to ask since he arrived. Watching your son kill Germans? My American son, Emil corrects firmly. And yes, it hurts like hell. But it would hurt more if the Nazis won. It would hurt more if my sons had to live in a world where Hitler's ideas were triumphant. My grandfather left Germany to escape men who thought they had the right to rule others through force. If I let Hitler win without fighting, my grandfather's sacrifice meant nothing. September 3rd, 1944. Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. A prisoner of war named Friedrich Müller refuses to work, stands in the middle of the farmyard with his arms crossed, screaming at the farmer in German. "Race traitor," he shouts. "You abandoned your Volk. You polluted your blood with mongrels. You betrayed everything German." The farmer, Johann Müller, no relation, whose family left Hesse in 1847 during the failed revolutions, sets down his coffee cup slowly, deliberately. He's 60 years old, built like the barn he raised with his own hands, weathered by decades of sun and wind. In accented German, slow and deliberate, every word carefully chosen, he responds. My grandfather left because Germans were starving. Left because there was no work, no food, no future. Here, I feed Americans, Germans, English, Polish, Irish, even. He pauses for effect. Idiots like you. Müller's farm produces 50,000 gallons of milk per year, 10,000 bushels of corn, 500 hogs ready for market. He employs 6 people full-time, pays them fair wages, owns 2 cars, a truck, 3 tractors. His daughter is in college studying medicine, will be a doctor. Something impossible for a farmer's daughter in Germany. His son designs bombers for Boeing in Seattle, creates the planes that drop bombs on Germany. Your Führer promised you all this, Müller continues, gesturing at his farm, his machinery, his prosperity. But you had to steal it from others, had to take it by force, had to build an empire on blood. We just worked for it. Took us 3 generations. We broke our backs and saved our money and bought land and built this. No stealing required. No empire, no war. Just work. The camp commander transfers Friedrich to another farm after this incident. The Schultz farm. Another German name? Another successful American. Another crack in the Nazi worldview. Another piece of the ideology crumbling. October 1944. Letters home. Prisoner of war Kurt Wagner writes to his mother in bomb-scarred Hamburg, where entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, where people live in basements and subway tunnels, where food is scarce and hope is scarcer. Mother, I work for a family named Wagner. No relation, they assure me, though we must have shared ancestors somewhere centuries ago. They left Württemberg in 1851 during the failed revolution. They have electric lights in every room. Not one bulb you turn off when you leave. Multiple lights. Light everywhere. Running water, hot and cold. Turn a tap and water comes out, already hot. A machine that keeps food cold. They call it a Frigidaire. Their barn is heated in winter for the animals. Their cows live better than we did in Hamburg before the war. Their son, Karl Wagner, is a captain in the American Army Air Corps. He flies B-17s. He might be bombing Hamburg right now as I write this. He might be dropping bombs on you, on our apartment, on our neighborhood. And his parents are proud of him. They have a photograph on their mantle of their grandfather, taken in 1851 before he left Germany. He was skin and bones, a walking skeleton, eyes hollow. Now his descendants are fat. Actually fat from too much food. Not propaganda fat. Actually overweight from eating too well. I don't understand anything anymore, Kurt writes, his hand shaking as he forms the letters. We were told we were the master race. We were told we were superior. We were told the Germans who left were cowards and weaklings. But they're the masters here, Mother. They own everything. They control everything. They're richer and stronger and healthier than we ever were. And we're the prisoners. We're the ones in camps. We're the ones who lost. The American military censors allow the letter through. They want these letters to reach Germany. Each one is a small bomb dropped on Nazi ideology. more effective than high explosives, more dangerous than tank columns. November 1944, Thanksgiving. Prisoners of war across America experience their first Thanksgiving, a holiday that doesn't exist in Germany, a harvest festival that's become something uniquely American. The German-American families, for reasons the prisoners can't fully understand, invite them to dinner. It's surreal. Enemies and cousins sitting at the same table, passing the same dishes, sharing the same food. In Kansas, the Kruger family, originally Kruger, serves turkey to prisoner of war Heinrich Kruger. Actually related, they discover, third cousins. Someone digs out the family Bible, traces the family tree, finds the connection. The American Krugers left in 1869. Heinrich's great-grandfather stayed. That one decision, made over 70 years ago, has led to this moment. The American Krugers own 800 acres of wheat, a grain elevator that stores grain for the entire county, shares in a railroad spur line. They have 3 cars, a truck, 2 tractors, a combine harvester. Heinrich's family in Germany owns nothing.